online and will be joining us. He and Representative Blackburn. But as vice chairman, this is a new experience for me. So I ask you all to treat me kindly and beg your indulgence for any mistakes that I might make. So help me out and we'll get through this. Barb, if you'd call the roll, please.
Thank you. Representative Blackburn.
Here.
Representative Clausen.
Here.
Representative Clifford. Here. Representative Duncan. Here. Chairman Nair.
Here.
Representative Hunt.
Here.
Representative McGuire. Are we marking him absent? Excused. Thank you. Representative Roscoe.
Here.
And Chairman Zwanitzer.
Here. You know we're going to start that.
Thank you. The first bill for our consideration today is House Bill 187 of elected official residency requirements. Representative Hunt, if you'd please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I'll be happy to. Committee, both here and away, I present to you House Bill 187. I believe, well, this is certainly an old friend of the legislature. I'm not 100% certain if it's been in front of your committee before. I would guess it has, the fact that it pertains to corporations and elections. But anyway, Mr. Chairman, the long and short of this is that this bill would amend current statutes to require that all county officers, all elected positions, be residents of the county that they are running for office and being elected in. This stems out of an issue that actually has originated in my home county, Weston County. And I'm sure that you're at least somewhat familiar with it, in that we've had, for the past few years, a county attorney who ran for and was elected to that position in Weston County, who lives in Campbell County and has never become a resident of Weston County. And so he has been holding that office and administering and doing those duties from afar. But Mr. Chairman, to add to that, here this past fall, we had a county commissioner who made the decision. He's held the office, I believe, for 2 terms now, partway through his second. Made the decision to move out of county with his family into Cook County, and continues to hold the position to which he was elected in Weston County. And so, Mr. Chairman, that is the essence for the reasoning behind the bill. And so, if I may, I'll just briefly walk through it. We're getting through, we're delving into several statutes, as you can see on page 1, starting on line 8, section 1. So jumping around a bit, but I'll just, like I say, I'll briefly run through it. So all we're doing is requiring residency of the following county positions, elected offices. So starting on page 2, line 9, we're saying residency requirements of a clerk of the district court. Down on line 16 of page 2, that applies to the coroner. Over on page 3, starting on line 10, we're talking about the district attorney shall reside within the judicial district in which that district attorney serves. Page 3, line 20, going into the county assessor shall be a resident of the county. And I, committee would point out that currently, unlike any other position, the county assessor is required to own property within the county to which they are elected. But that, and I've always found that a bit interesting, that stands out in saying that they must own property, but there's nothing that says that they have to live there. So moving on, Mr. Chairman, to page 4. And here we are with county prosecuting attorney shall be a resident of the county. Over on to page, moving from 4 to 5, line 1, page 5, talking about the county clerk. And then down to bottom of page 5, line 17, talking about the requirements for county commissioners. And over on page 6, line 1 and 2 and 3, county sheriff. Lines 8 of that page, county treasurer. And then down at the lower half of page 6 and over to page 7, Mr. Chairman, we're talking about getting into the vacancy. And this brings up the issue that I just mentioned of is one example of someone moving out of the county. So, Mr. Chairman, on page 6, starting on line 20, Romanet 2, saying the office of any of those mentioned, when the person fails to reside in the county from which he is elected, over on page 7, Romanet 3, in the office of the county and prosecuting attorney, and when the person fails to reside in the county or one of the counties from which he is elected, or in Romanet 4, line 8, or in the office of a district attorney when the person fails to reside in that judicial district to which they're elected. So basically, we're applying the same standard as to if you were a legislator and you moved outside of your district. You would no longer, once you claimed residency elsewhere, you can no longer hold that position. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to belabor that. That is the bill, and I'm happy to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Representative Hunt? I have one. I probably should know this because I've been on corporations for a while and we have seen this bill previously, something similar anyway. Are there counties where they have trouble like county coroner, a district attorney, or a county attorney finding qualified people who are residents of the county?
Mr. Chairman, admittedly, yes. And case in point with Weston County, we in those circumstances, we did have a county attorney, lived in the county, lived in Newcastle, was not doing his job. And, admittedly, by the will of the voters, a guy came in from Gamble County and said, I am not a resident, but he did win overwhelmingly in that election. I guess, Mr. Chairman, I would say that, specifically, particularly to county attorneys, obviously they have to have the education to take the job. And then with county coroner, there's some stipulations to go with that as well. I don't, other than that example, I'm not aware of an issue having occurred where they simply can't find anyone to run. But I would also point out that that there's already in statute a provision that if two neighboring counties find themselves in a jam, then their commissions can get together and form a district for that attorney position,
Okay.
which they can share between the two counties or however many might be required.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions of Representative Hunt? Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Representative Hunt, are there any other, just like the example you just made of not being able to find somebody in my district, we don't have one sheriff that lives in our county because of the expense of living there. I like the idea. I was just wondering if there's any, if there are extenuating circumstances that the county themselves could say, we're going to make an exception here or something like that. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chairman and Representative Roscoe, none that I am aware of, but that's not to say that there aren't other circumstances out there that have either currently or have happened in the past. So, did that fully answer that? I'm not sure. I'm sorry if I completely understood.
That's fine. I think just think it is something we should think about if this moves forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Representative Bond. Any from our two Zoom participants? Apparently not. All right, we'll open up for public testimony. Any other legislators would like to testify on this bill? Any state agencies? Chairman Zwanitzer, I'll depend on you to bring people in as they are needed. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So while I'm waiting to see if anyone raises their hand for this bill, I did have a question because the good sponsor of the bill this morning on the floor, I believe, advocated for county health officers not having to live within the county. So why does an elected official have to live in the county, but the county health officer doesn't, in his opinion?
Mr. Vice Chair Ayer and to Representative Zwanitzer, so to that point, the amendment that was discussed on the floor this morning was state residency, not so much county, although I do, Representative, I think I get it. You bring up a good point. I think that in any case, we're talking about, in this case, elected officials. And I think that it's only, in my mind, only fair that if you are going to step up to the plate and put your name out there as a candidate for any office, frankly, that you should live in and understand the community which you intend to represent to put your name on the ballot. As far as county health officers go, again, obviously there's a high bar for education, which obviously that bill broadens that scope, different issue. But I think it would obviously be preferential if they lived in the county or the community to which they were appointed as a health officer in that jurisdiction. That being said, I can potentially see where that might not be the case, especially again in light of recent circumstances where a lot of these folks have really been publicly demonized, and so for those places where there have vacancies have occurred, there's not going to be a line out the door for it. But again, they signed up for the job. Yes, that's true. They were appointed. But again, when you're putting your name on the ballot, I just think that it is critically important that they understand and live in the communities that they say that they want to represent.
Thank you, Representative Hunt. Chairman Zwanter, do you know of anyone who's online anticipating testifying on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, there are 14 people online, but not one of them seems to indicate they want to speak on this bill. So I think you're good from the internet.
Okay, anyone in the room want to speak with? County Commissioners, Mr. Ryman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I am Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the County Commissioners Association. It's a pleasure to speak on this topic today. I have in the past had a brief moment to take a look at this issue because it does come up on occasion, and it did come up a couple of years ago as a corporations committee sponsored bill. If you look at the history a bit, and I know that Representative Hunt hinted at this, the county assessor is the only current position that requires some sort of tie to the community, and that is through the ownership of property. There was a point in time in which all county officials, including county commissioners, were required to be residents of that particular county. Now, I couldn't find enough information in the case law and in the statute books to give you a full picture, but I was sort of drawn back to Representative McGuire's presentation in this committee just a week or so ago when we were talking about congressional candidates and the national landscape as it relates to residency. And I think that that very topic has some bearing here if you go back and look at that history. One of my commissioners did submit some information to you, Weston County Commissioner Marty Ertman, who's the chairwoman of that commission, did provide her own analysis, and she's taken a particular interest in this issue because it has been something that county has experienced over the course of the past 4, 5, 6 years. And so I would let her comments stand for themselves. As Representative Hunt indicated, there are at least 2 county officials that I'm aware of that do reside outside of their county, as Representative Hunt indicated. One of those was elected by the voters, knowing that that individual was residing outside of the county and against a candidate that existed on the ballot at the same time. So I think that's an important piece. The other one is one of my commissioners who, because of various circumstances, has moved outside of the county into the neighboring county. That individual, as I understand it, still has business and personal interests in the county and is elected to stay in his position moving forward. I think my commissioners do agree with the sentiment that you want to have individuals as close to their elected office as possible. And there are ways to address that. And I know that Representative Hunt has looked at this issue of perhaps requiring specific amounts of time in the office. I'm not here to advocate on that issue right now, but that is another way to get at this particular issue. But my members believe that the ultimate decision here should stand with the voters, not with us constraining their particular options. Further, I think we all want to ensure that we have the best candidate possible in these seats. Some of these individuals, as Representative Hunt and others have noted, require special education, attorneys in particular. Representative Ayer, Chairman Ayer, you asked about, has this been an issue in other counties? And the answer is yes, particularly as it relates to the county attorney. Niobrara County, for a number of years and the past decade, had a struggle with trying to find somebody that was qualified to fill that seat, and really had some struggles at the local level. Representative Hunt is absolutely correct. There is the possibility of 2 counties coming together, not under the guise of a district attorney position, but in collaboration on the county attorney. And that's a possibility. But I think in that instance, Niobrara County wanted to have an official, hopefully within the county or as close as possible, and has not pursued that. Thankfully, that issue resolved itself. And they now have a wonderful county attorney up there. In fact, I think actually the Weston County issue may resolve itself as well, because as I understand it, that county attorney has taken a position elsewhere in the state and will be moving, and hopefully they'll be able to find someone locally. Mr. Chairman, I'll end here on a couple last points. In previous iterations of this bill, there has been some amendment that would allow for the Board of County Commissioners to have that power to appoint an individual if you didn't have a qualified individual for the ballot, or ended up in a situation where you didn't have a candidate. And what I've heard from my commissioners is they don't want that power. They want this decision to reside with the voters, because these are individuals that will be in position potentially for as many as 4 years for each of those seats. So they want the voters to have their say in this. Mr. Chairman, I'll just close. We don't just want warm bodies in these positions as well. We want to ensure that we have the best and the brightest. And unfortunately, sometimes that is an individual that is outside of our community or outside of our county. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reeman, and I apologize. I mispronounced your name when you first came up. I knew it's Reeman. You mentioned, before I ask for other questions, you mentioned one of your commissioners had submitted some comments for the benefit of those who may not have seen those. Can you just briefly summarize that?
Mr. Chairman, if you could give me a second and get my iPad so that I could
Okay.
go through those. I don't remember the entirety of them off the top of my head. They are rather lengthy, but I'll be happy to do
Well,
that.
yeah, and we don't need a word per word, just the general idea. Any other questions for Mr. Reedman?
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman's on it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is county attorney the only county position that has that flexibility for a county to contract with another county, or sheriff or clerk? Are those also allowed in statute right now?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Swanitzer, it is the only position that I'm aware of that has a similar provision.
Thank you.
Any other questions from our Zoom participants? Any questions from here? Did you find your reference you're looking for, Mr. Reedman?
Let me get my.
Oh, no, that's.
Mr. Chairman, she sent me 2 emails, and you may have received 2 emails. The second one of those was more specific to that appointment piece, because that had come up in the conversation previously. And so she was concerned about that. As I mentioned, I've got other commissioners that are more broadly concerned about that. Mr. Chairman, she also talked about, I've got lots of emails coming in today. Everybody's back at it. Okay. She does go into some history, much more in depth than what I provided here. And she goes back to the US Constitution. She provides you with some information relative to case law and attempts to tie that to Wyoming statute. I think one of her main concerns and interests is there a compelling interest for the state to require this construct of you have to be a resident of the county? And I think what I understand from her written testimony here is that that is a bit tied back to those constitutional decisions that have come down, that you have to have a compelling interest to require that residency. Now, she makes the case that in the interest of municipalities, maybe you have that compelling interest because a municipal officer has home rule. That means that they have the ability to go beyond what you might have prescribed as the bounds for their particular action. So in that case, they should be responsible for what they're ultimately going to be putting in place. A county official, she would contend, is a bit different because you all prescribe, we're entities of the state. You prescribe what our boundaries are, and we have to live within that. So, the idea being that what happens in Laramie County is going to be very much similar with, obviously some local differences, but between different counties. You will have a lot of similarities because we only have those bounds of what you've given us. So, for example, the assessor is going to be assessing property the same in one county from the next. So I think that's part of her testimony for you to consider. Let me see if I see any other relevant points. She makes a case for an individual that may have, and she uses a local example, and I don't know the road myself, but a road that crosses 2 counties, and a particular individual may have their mailbox on one side of the county. They reside in the other county, but yet their kids are going to the county that they represent. Is that something that we want to exclude from here? Now, maybe that's a qualification we could put into the statute, but it's a concern that she brings forward to you. Mr. Chairman, she probably has a few other points, but I think those are the main salient points.
Okay. Do you know, Mr. Raymond, do you know of any other elected officials? You mentioned municipal officers or are they in statute required to reside within their municipality?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that answer off the top of my head.
Okay. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I'll try and do this in a question. We had an example in our community that we had a municipal judge who was living in the county, but not within the municipality and had to be replaced. So is it maybe per municipality in their rules, or do you think maybe it's in statute?
No, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, I think that perhaps there is such a requirement, and that's one of her points, is that because they have home rule, they have a compelling interest, that is a place where you can put it. Her belief being that, what is your compelling interest for requiring residency for county officials? And if you don't have one, then you shouldn't be putting that in place. And perhaps you might be afoul of the Constitution. I'm not an attorney. I don't believe she is. And so I want to be very careful with that, but I think that's part of the argument.
Thank you, Mr.
She's not.
Riemann. Any other questions? Nobody online, nobody here. Thank you, Mr. Riemann. Any others in the room wishing to testify on this bill? By the way, Mr. Riemann, you mentioned that turning it over to the voters always ensures the best and brightest. I'm living proof that does not always hold true. All right, if there's no further testimony, we will close public testimony. And what's the committee's pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Moved by Representative Blackburn, second by Representative Clifford. Any discussion? You can join us back up here, Representative Hunt, if you'd like to. What's your wish? Do you want to go through the bills page by page?
we already did that. Question on the bill.
Any other comments or questions? Question being called. Or if you'd call the roll, please.
Representative Blackburn,
Aye.
Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Vice Chair Air,
No.
Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire, no. Representative Roscoe. Chairman Swanitzer,
No.
Mr.
6-3.
Thank you. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 159, liquor manufacturer regulations, and we have another one of our very own committee members presenting. Representative Duncan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. House Bill 159, Liquor Manufacturer Regulations, is a carryover from the days of Prohibition. Looking back into history, Prohibition overnight, with good intentions, turned millions of law-abiding Americans into lawbreakers. There were so many lessons to learn, yet some of these arguments are still being waged today between the haves and have-nots, the moral versus the immoral, the resident versus the non-resident, the regulated and government versus liberty and non-government. I want to refresh our members of the committee that in every part of our US Constitution is about expanding personal liberties and freedoms, except when addressing those to the 18th Amendment, Prohibition, and the 21st Amendment of the repeal. The repeal wasn't a complete repeal, but setting up the three-tier system and having a partnership between the federal government and the states, while the states were allowed to ultimately decide how dry, quote unquote, and how wet, quote unquote, we want it to be. This bill was heard during the interim. However, it was not clearly understood that we citizens of Wyoming can and do, even though it's not necessarily legal, purchase distilled products online. These products are coming in the state and shipped directly to consumers without any collection of taxes nor any regulation or oversight. Upon discussions with the Department of Revenue, we are in need of getting these entities to register with the state to allow enforcement and better tracking. Currently, wine is allowed to the DTC at a rate of 12%. Currently, Nebraska and North Dakota allows DTC of distillery, as well as, I believe, 7 other states. This bill will move our state into capturing the lost revenue of these online sales that are currently happening. I liken it to Amazon and online sales. Currently, our brick and mortars are paying taxes as well as our wine DTCs. So we need to include the lost revenues of DTC distilleries currently happening. Enforcement is also an issue. The lack of personnel to carry out the duties, the revenues gained could be appropriated to hire these enforcement necessities. The second portion of this bill, it deals with the satellites of our Wyoming manufacturers. The bill suggests allowing 2. I have further thoughts on potential amendments after we hear full testimony from everyone. Walking through the bill, we've created a new section on page 1, starting on line 13, all the way through page 6 on line 10. This section 12.2.205 allows the shipment of distilled or rectified alcohol liquor out of state. Section A states any manufacturer must be licensed in its home state and can only ship to those households alcohol liquor which is not listed with the division as part of its inventory and distribution operation. Section B outlines the requirements for prior to these being shipped to the out-of-state. The shipper shall file an application, pay a license fee, provide a copy of their current manufacturer license from their home state, provide information that the division requires, obtain from the division an out-of-state shipper's license. Section C outlines the requirements that shall. Total shipping limit is to 20 liters to any one household during a 12-month period. Ship only to those that are 21 or older. Ship to for personal use, not resale. And malt beverages are not allowed. And shipping containers and labels have to be contained with contains alcoholic beverage, adult over 21, signature required for delivery. Ensure all shipments into the state by a duly licensed carrier and carrier complies with the required signature. Remit to the division the tax equal to the maximum percentage of the profit estimated, 12-2-303A. That is applied to retail price for each shipment and the requirement of the reporting to the division. Maintain records for 3 years, deem consent that they are consenting to the jurisdiction of the division and other applicable agencies in our state. Section D is out-of-state shippers license valid for 12 months where they are allowed to renew, providing all the information again for $50. Section E is the liabilities and penalties section. Now, as we move over all the way over to page 7, section I, line 4, we've changed from 1 to 2 satellite locations. Down on the bottom of the page, conforming language is on lines 22 to 23. And then over on page 8, we're inserting new language and sections starting on line 2, page 10 through line 13. These sections are in reference to allowing shipments to households from satellite locations. And the language is the same as we just discussed in more detail in the earlier section at the beginning of the bill. The effective date would be July 1st, 2021. I personally became an outlaw bootlegger trying to purchase a bottle for myself online, and I was shocked at how simple and quick the process was. Upon my experiment with 1 bottle I purchased, the state and my county lost out on $13 to the general fund in our county. I truly feel as if everyone needs to pay their fair share. I'm asked often, can you really fix all the problems we see around us? In this case, I believe we can. The wine DTC and the brick and mortars are all paying their fair share, and so should the online distillery shippers. In closing, I remind you, once again, prohibition and legislation with good intentions turn law-abiding Americans into lawbreakers with their unintended consequences. Thank you for your time, and I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Representative Duncan? I have one. Did you consider, in addition to the language on page 4 on the labeling of the container, bucking horse and rider, including in there?
Mr. Vice Chair, I think that would be totally appropriate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Duncan, could you, just because I don't know exactly what it is, but a satellite, that refers to a distillery with just an opportunity to sell or to actually produce in another place?
Mr. Vice Chair, Representative Roscoe, it is an alternate second location. And they are to, as you're going to hear from testimony, there's different interpretations of that. That's why I say, depending on what we hear, depends on whether we have an amendment or not, but a satellite location is a secondary location. Some interpret it, originally the intent of the bill in statute, what I'm understanding as I researched, its original intent was to be just a tasting room, kind of like Napa Valley and other places where it's a storefront, you go in, it's off-site of your manufacturing location. It's off-site, you go in and you just taste the products. Others are, it's an interpretation that with distillery is different than wine and beer or malt beverage, because distillery, you usually mix things with it as in a cocktail. So some interpretations is it's more of, some are interpreting it more as a bar, whereas others are saying, well, we're just rectifying, we're just adding products to it to taste it at its finest. So we'll hear different interpretations of what the word satellite truly means.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Any other questions? You may be able to answer this. Maybe some of your other people will be able to better. How much of this, of what you did bootlegging, how much of this is occurring? How much are out-of-state shippers sending in that is not already in the state's inventory?
Actually,
So
Mr. Vice Chair,
am I
don't-
understanding that correctly? It has
Yeah.
to be, if it's
I
in
think
the
that's-
state's inventory, then it's not
Correct.
legal to bring it. It's just, if it's not, then it can be shipped in.
Kind of. Currently, Mr. Vice Chair, you're not allowed to buy it online, any distilleries, period.
Oh,
Whether it comes into, whether it's
Whether-
available in the state or not. Currently, you're not allowed to buy it at all. And so therein lies the problem. And as far as how much is happening, that might be a question that we actually ask the division and find out for sure, but evidently quite a bit.
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I think we have Mr. Well, I guess you should ask, are any other legislators want to testify on this bill first? Seeing none, we'll go to state agencies. Director Noble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan Noble, Director of the Department of Revenue. I appreciate you allowing us to testify today. I'm going to limit my comments to administration of the tax, and then I think what it is and why I guess that liquor sales are controlled in the state of Wyoming now. But originally, looking at this bill, probably the question that is really being answered is how much of this product is being brought into the state of Wyoming without our knowledge. I hate to say it, but I'm not sure you don't know what you don't know. This is something where we are not licensing people to do this at this point. So any product that is coming in, and we're talking about distilled spirits, is illegal today. We have I believe there's 800 or 900 vendors that are licensed to sell wines in the state on a direct basis, and that's something that I think what happened back in the early 2000s, and they are licensed. They do remit on a monthly basis to us, and the reports that are described in this bill are identical to the reports that we get from direct shipment of wine. How extensive this is in the state, I really don't know at this point, but I do know that it's coming in. One of the concerns I have was brought up by Representative Duncan, and that is the enforcement of this once it goes into place. We have 3 people in our compliance division today, and those 3 people are required to go around the state and do liquor inspections and monitor licensing in all of the jurisdictions and monitor the licenses for everybody that is out there. So I think that in order to get beyond this, we're probably either going to have to contract with someone else to help us with this, or bring on more people to actually handle the volume. I don't know exactly how many people would license to do this, but the other aspect of this is we need to find those that are not willing to license with us to do this and are doing it anyway. There are wine shippers that we have dealt with in the past that chose not to license, and we've worked pretty hard to catch anyone that we can. But as with anything in a self-reporting system, those that do not license with us they're out there, I'm sure. The other issue, and I believe Representative Duncan brought this up, and that is why after Prohibition ended, where it was control of the sale of alcohol turned over to the states. And I got to say that while there are what is referred to as control states, of which Wyoming is one, where you take on a portion of the 3-tier system, virtually every state in the union in some way, shape, or form controls the sale of alcohol, be it through licensing, regulation, any number of different ways. The state of Wyoming chose this way to deal with it. And I guess the question is, why do we regulate the product at all? I think one of the concerns, obviously, is we certainly don't want it in the hands of children. That is one regulation that we deal with. I think we want to limit to some extent the access. That's why we have a population formula as it relates to the number of outlets that we have. And I think that the concern that people really have associated with this product and why Prohibition started in the first place is that this is something that, if it is misused, can be dangerous. There are over 95,000 people a year that die from alcohol-related illnesses and injuries. It is not selling a normal fungible product. It is something that obviously even the federal government has chosen to regulate in some way, shape, or form. I'm not speaking against this bill. I just want people to understand that's why we do what we do today, and want you to recognize that this is something that is it's a little different than selling groceries or something like that. This is has a potential to have issues, and we are in this business because of that. Mr. Chairman, one of the other questions that was asked is what a satellite location is. It's a retail license that is offered to manufacturers that allows them an alternate site outside of a tasting room at their local distillery to allow them to sell their own products. They do not sell other people's products. They sell their own products in these satellite locations. So they are limited to that. It is not something where they can take on any other manufacturer's products. It's limited to their own product. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. Any questions? Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, so since this activity is currently illegal, how many enforcement activities or charges has your department done on these internet sales today?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I believe that to my knowledge, there have been 2 court cases associated with this. And this was an entity that came into the state and offered I guess I would call it a method of selling similar to a multi-level marketing company where you have things, host things in your home, and then you make a decision as to whether you want to purchase after the showing. The problem is the people that were coming in doing this were not licensed, and they were not at authorized dispensing facilities in order to be able to do it. So there were cases that were brought forth that went, I believe, all the way to the Supreme Court to deal with this issue. As it relates to how we approach finding people that are non-compliant, in the states that have aggressively pursued this, they've set up sting operations whereby people actually from the compliance section actually bought product, much as Representative Duncan had mentioned, have it delivered to their home, and then they pursue legal issue with the company that did it. That's my understanding of the majority of the process. Unfortunately, we don't have funding to do those sorts of things at this point, but it is something that we could certainly look at in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Any other? Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Director, I have a question. So you talked about the 3 people in compliance that go throughout the jurisdictions and all of the state. What is the average time for them to get that done? Can you walk me through real briefly? What's the average time to complete that licensing requirement to make sure they're compliant?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clifford, I believe, depending on what it is that they find, it can be as quickly as a half an hour. The issue is you've got, I think it's 95,000 square miles and 1,285 vendors to go to, and the task is to try to visit these places twice in a year. So as you can see, that it's a fairly extensive effort just in getting out to see these establishments. Hope that answered your question.
Any other questions? We have is it Novotny Smith from the agency as well? Can you bring her in, Mr. Chairman?
She's in, Mr. Chairman. I believe her camera's frozen.
Looks like it, yes. So we'll see if we can get that issue resolved. And in the meantime, any other state agencies in the room wishing to testify? Any members of the public wishing to testify? Mr. Moser. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Mosier, Wyoming State Liquor Association. There'll be a number of people, I think, testifying on this, but I thought I'd get mine out of the way so you don't have to look forward to it the entire meeting. We oppose this bill as we did last time. I've been doing this for a lot of years, and it's probably the most harmful bill to especially packaged liquor stores that I've seen, and I'll get into why, Mr. Chairman. Even though you can do something illegally, doesn't mean you should make it legal. And we'll get into why. Now, one of the things I think that is misunderstood is how much money this would bring in, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. On wine in FY 2019, which is legal to do DTC on wine, the state in FY 2019 brought in $687,000. Now, it seems like a lot of money, but bear in mind that retailers can do direct ship. as well as DTC to customers. And over 40% of that amount was done by retailers, which if we legalize DTC of spirits would be retailers ordering that as well. So if you subtract the 60% that is actually DTC to consumers, you're down to about $412,000 a year. And bear in mind, this stuff has been legal for 20 some years. Now, a lot more people drink wine than drink spirits. Gallup poll from 2018 reports that people's preferred beverage, 42% beer, 34% wine, 19% spirits. So about 56% of the total that prefer wine drink spirits. So if you subtract that, you're down to, if the whole thing is legal and if it's in existence for 20 years, you're talking about the state of Wyoming bringing $230,000 a year. That's even less than the beer tax. And if you extrapolate that a little bit, because you can, because we're taking it from 12% to 17.6%, wine is at 12, it's still at about $300,000. And as Mr. Noble testified, you have to hire people to enforce it. There are over 1,100 wine shippers that take a lot of time. So we're not talking about bringing in a lot of money, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Bear in mind, when we talk about, a lot of people think when we talk about you can direct ship or you can DTC products that aren't carried by the liquor division, it's like, gosh, that must be boutique items. It's not. Over 40% of the products, spirits carried by a liquor store that I used as an example here in Cheyenne, over 40% is not listed by the liquor division. If we legalize DTC of spirits, that would all flip to direct shipment rather than through the liquor division, because they already order over 50% of their products through direct ship on wine. So that's lost revenue to the state of Wyoming. And it's also kind of forcing basically the whole wholesale tier out. There is concern about the illegality and that people can do it. And I have that concern too. But like I said, underage drinking is happening too. And our answer for that is increased enforcement. We have supported the idea of putting more people in enforcement in the liquor division because it is a severe problem. Now, when we talk about who legalizes DTC of wine, I think we have slightly different numbers here. But according to the NCSL, which you're all acquainted with, there are only 6 states and the District of Columbia that legalize DTC of spirits. Now, what would happen, committee, is if we legalize DTC of spirits, 49 states could ship to Wyoming, but we could only ship to 6 because legality is based on the state you're shipping to rather than where you're shipping from. So all of our little distilleries, all of our liquor stores will be competing with 49 states on an unfair playing field. And at the same time, we can only ship to 6 and inside Wyoming. I don't think that's worth $300,000 in tax. As we go on, one of the things, and I remember, Mr. Chairman, you brought this up. One of the reasons DTC of spirits is only allowed in 6 states, whereas DTC of wine is allowed in 44, that's a big difference, is because of underage access. And I think a couple other people are going to hit on this. There is a study that I thought was good because it's not related to the liquor industry. It was published in the Journal of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. It was a study done by the University of North Carolina. And they did a study on underage people, 18 to 20-year-olds, ordering alcohol online. How many people underage got it? 45% received that product underage. And it would be higher, except 11% that weren't part of the 45%, the delivery wasn't made because nobody was home. The problem is, and I remember we were all discussing delivery not too long ago with House Bill 13, it's night and day. The people doing DTC of spirits are not trained in alcohol service. They do not have liquor licenses. Nobody's doing a compliance check on them. Even if we hired people in compliance, it's not like they're going to go check in your house. And so these are largely unregulated sales. And with spirits, we're talking about a completely different animal. Underage people are not desiring a fine bottle of Merlot to go back behind the shed and chug it. They use spirits. Not that I did, but I'm guessing some of you might have. And that's where the real risk is with underage. It's also easier to conceal, a lot higher potency. Now, when we say, well, gosh, just boutique items, no. Products that aren't listed by the liquor division include some really cheap stuff. There are tens of thousands of products out there, and I think the liquor division lists about 3,000 of them. And so you're more opening that market all over the place. Just remember, I mean, we've trained over 38,000 people in responsible alcohol service. Responsibility is my job, and I do not want underage people. We're not talking about frozen burritos here. We're talking about a product that can kill them if misused and if in the wrong hands. As I mentioned in committee last time, a frat house over the hill may not be interested in ordering a case of fine Merlot, but they'll do it for spirits. Lastly, and I will be happy to take any questions, regarding the satellite issue, I actually am partially responsible for screwing that up. When we first thought of satellites for wineries back in the late 90s, we just thought satellites would be tasting rooms. I mean, that's what you go to Napa Valley, you go to Bourbon Trail, they're all tasting rooms. You have some samples, you buy a present, a package, a bottle. Well, we wrote it loose enough that you could basically turn it into a bar with your product. I mean, there's a couple of them where one in particular where you walk in and you could swear it's a bar. Now, we're open to the idea of tasting rooms, but it needs to be defined rather than just satellite. And so would we be open to the idea of distilleries, and you'll hear more from distilleries in a little bit, open to distilleries to have tasting rooms? Yeah, but what I'd prefer, and we've got House Bill 156 going right now, winery permit bill. Chairman Zwanitzer had the same bill for distilleries that we supported in 2019. That's when everybody gets at the table. The Distillers Guild, who don't have a position on this bill, by the way, the Distillers Guild, the Liquor Association, the beer wholesalers, I don't care who, everybody gets at the table. We find something that works for everybody. I've been doing this over 25 years, and I have never supported a bill that would harm one of the sectors of our industry. That's not how I roll. And we don't support bills that would do that. Lastly, remember, I mean, $300,000. How many brick and mortar establishments will be hurt for that $300,000? Now, I will admit that this bill does create jobs, but none of them in Wyoming. It's all, now bear in mind, I mean, the illegal sales happening right now are normally coming from little retailers in other states that know we don't enforce it, so they're just doing it. It's not the big guys, because the big guys are distilleries. And the big guys make lots of whiskey and they can't afford to lose that license being caught for an illegal sale. But if this gets legalized, the door flies wide open, brick and mortars are going to lose, and jobs are going to be lost. This job will hurt business. The business is in your district. This business will lose jobs and also hurt our communities. Underage drinking. One thing I didn't mention that I won't get into too far is counterfeit alcohol. The World Health Organization estimates that over 25% of the alcohol worldwide is counterfeit or illegal. Now, the problem is with counterfeit spirits. The reason we don't worry about counterfeit wine is because if you make counterfeit wine, it just tastes bad. But spirits is a different world. Just to illustrate that, some of you know people that home brew. The federal government doesn't care. Make some wine at home, doesn't care. But if you set up a distillery in your house without being licensed, it's a federal felony, up to 5 years in prison and $100,000 fine, because counterfeit product kills people. And that's not worth $300,000 either. So I respect the intent of the bill, but honestly, the disaster that it would be affected with brick and mortar businesses, Wyoming jobs, not out of state jobs, is massive. And I really thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Any questions for Mr. Mosier? Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Mosier, so I voted against this bill in the interim, and then I went home and realized that this may be a problem of technology that we have as a legislature maybe have overlooked for several years. So I went home and I pulled up on my smartphone and I looked at my options to order direct retail, and they were pretty big. And then I realized some friends of mine had ordered some good scotch off the internet. And this is something that is very common. So to me, this gives the brick and mortar people a 17% disadvantage. If we regulated, we have two choices to go down this path. We either have to do enforcement actions, which I feel is very difficult, or we accept what technology's brought us and we regulate this action. So if we legalize it with this bill, and I think it's in this bill, we take away that 17% advantage that right now these people are doing, and they're doing it illegally, but we have really no teeth in the matter. And then we put our brick and mortar stores on parity. So if there was a liquor store across the street, I believe there would be competition. If there are hundreds of these direct to consumer websites out there, or one, it doesn't make any difference for competition to the brick and mortar, one operating illegally. So I guess that'd be my question. How do you feel the 17% disadvantage that's currently going on affects you, or is an advantage to your retailers?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, first of all, if DTC of spirits were legalized, it would be promoted by the big guys. And don't make no mistake that a lot of the force behind these moves are the big guys that want in the alcohol industry, and they will bury us. I beat both of you to it, by the way, in a joint revenue committee. The last time I actually saw this bill, this concept, was about 1998. And I bought 2 bottles of scotch online, and I actually had them committee with me to show the committee how easy it was to do. Back then, most of it was by phone. And we killed the DTC of spirits bill and just did wine, left malt beverages out. But at the time, I was a bar owner, and I bought that stuff online cheaper than I could buy it from the liquor division. Because a lot of these states that are privatized, not control states, these companies can buy at a deep discount, deeper than we can buy it at. And so this bill would put us at a disadvantage, 17.6 or not. I mean, would it create parity? Sort of, except they don't have to pay for brick and mortar or employees or property taxes. These people just have a 17.6%. And bear in mind with this stuff, a lot of it will be worked by the retailers anyway. I feel if only 6 states have done it, that's probably a bad sign. And any advantage brick and mortar may have or distilleries may have is more than negated by the idea that we can't ship in to the vast majority of states because it's still illegal and will remain so. And so that's why we pose it. Like I said, it's not burritos. It's a product that can be abused and misused, and underage access being an issue as well. I don't want to open the door to people advertising this product online. So I hope that answers your question, Representative Clausen.
Go ahead, Mr. Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Mosier, so if we don't legalize, and you've been around this conversation for a long time, probably since I was in college abusing this product, but so what are the other steps? What do you recommend, or what's going on in the conversation for some sort of enforcement? Because I think we have to go one direction or the other.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, there's been a number of states. The last one I saw was Michigan, where they have been really cracking down on online sales. They've basically been doing stings. And so you'd get 2 people in the liquor division. Now you could pay for those 2 people just by preventing lost sales with spirits. And bear in mind, there are illegal wine sales going on all over too, because there's nobody enforcing it. They're shipping in, they're not paying the 12%, and nobody can do anything. And so I would support, as we've supported in the past, the idea of adding a couple enforcement people in the liquor division. And what happens is if Joe's Liquor in Michigan sends me product, you pop them and report it to their liquor division, and they get in trouble with their people. And if you're a distillery, you've got a federal license. It's very difficult to get at stake as well.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mosier, just in general, do you know if over this past year with the COVID and the lockdowns and all that, has there been an increase in online direct-to-home sales just in general, not necessarily, I mean, of all liquor, of all alcohol?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hunt, yes, I believe the liquor division has been up quite a bit in its recordings of DTC of wine because people can't leave the house, and DTC of spirits. Illegal sales have been going on as well. I think that will start tailing off again now that the pandemic is settling down. But yes, the online sales of pretty much everything increased, whether legal or illegal.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mosier, I got a couple of questions. Wouldn't this be set up like somebody purchasing something off of eBay, where if I purchase something off of eBay, eBay collects the taxes for the state and sends it to the state? Wouldn't this be set up the same way so we would not lose those tax revenues?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blackburn, I think I got your question. It would be set up like the DTC of wine is, where the shipper remits the 12% to the state of Wyoming, and that includes sales to retailers. I believe, does that answer your question, Representative Blackburn?
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, proceed, Mr. Representative Blackburn.
So, Mr. Mosier, when we're talking about distilleries, are they set up then, hard liquor distilleries? Are they set up to do that like wine?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blackburn, some of them aren't, but they will if more states go online. A lot more wineries are involved. But I'm sure in the states where it is legal, the 6 states, at least according to the NCSL, where it's legal, I'm sure they're set up to do that. The movement across the country has not been legalizing DTC of spirits. We're getting national attention for all the wrong reasons here. I'm getting phone calls from people I didn't even know existed on this. The wholesalers are freaking out, everything. So we'd be kind of breaking into new ground. Most of the states that allow it, I think did it before Granholm, which is a Supreme Court case that said in 2005, that said your in-state laws have to reflect the same for out of state. And so a lot of these states, or some of these states with DTC of spirits, had legalized it in state, but when Granholm hit, they had to reflect the laws. And so there has not been recently too many states that have gone this direction, just because of the Granholm difficulties and the competition over state lines and the risk involved.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
I'm going to go next to Ms. Novotny Smith. I think you're with us now, correct? You're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay.
We can hear
Can you
you
hear
now.
me now? Okay,
We
great.
can.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. My internet has been unstable all morning, working through the storm. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am Nicole Novotny Smith, the administrator of the Liquor Division. And I believe my audio cut out when Representative Clifford was asking about visits to retailers. And Mr. Noble, Director Noble's correct. They take about 30 minutes. But in some cases, I know that our compliance officers have been able to visit with an establishment in about 15 minutes to ascertain that they are compliant and doing everything that they need to do to uphold and abide by the law. We have invested efforts in compliance, especially related to the illegal shipment or legal distribution via mail of liquor and spirits. And we have had correspondence and interactions with several companies that were shipping in illegally. I would say it's safe to say less than 10. And we worked with them. We aim to work with them to get them to have an understanding what they can and cannot do. And as Director Noble mentioned, we worked exclusively with some wine companies recently that were operating sort of a multi-level management process in selling wine, which can be done provided you meet specific regulations. The only thing I would add to this discussion is that 2020 is a very tough baseline in terms of establishing what trends are happening with regard to the purchase of alcohol, because all alcohol consumption was up and our sales certainly were up at the Liquor Division. However, there were still some on-premise sales whereby people could still go purchase package or with delivery options have liquor delivered in their local municipality. So it's difficult to say where, when, and how people were consuming alcohol and to identify the means by which they acquired that alcohol in 2020. I will add to the conversation as well that in the state of Michigan, I believe they also give their Liquor Division or their enforcement authority the means to audit and receive records from common carriers. So your UPS, your FedEx, They actually also have to submit reports to the division or to that agency and tell them what was shipped by a vendor that is shipping alcohol directly, so that they can reconcile those reports of the shipments with the records and reports that they receive from the shipper. So that's another level besides just having sting operations, where they have the means for enforcement, the authority for enforcement, and the technology and personnel to do that. And I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Any questions of Mr. Botany Smith? Seeing none, go back to the room and who would, yes, please come forward and give your name and who you represent.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chase Lusher. My brother and I, we run a distillery here in Cheyenne, Wyoming called Chronicles Distilling. We're a veteran-owned business. My brother was a rifleman and I was a machine gunner. It took 2.5 years to get open. It was kind of a nightmare. But luckily we got open. We almost went broke in the process. That was interesting, but luckily we're still here. I'm here to oppose the second tasting room mainly. My view on it, the first tasting room, we already don't agree with that because it can be anywhere in the state of Wyoming. We don't think that's fair, as the email that I sent most of you earlier today states. It would allow somebody, we're getting people slowly that are moving up from Colorado, or just people that live here. If they wanted to, they could start, the current law allows them, they could start a distillery anywhere. Podunk, middle of nowhere, easy regulations, quick, cheap, and then they can put their tasting room, which is kind of technically a bar. You're able to sell cocktails and bottles to go. You know, I don't mean to cut my own throat, but that's basically kind of what it is. We are allowing people to do tastings, to taste our product, and it's a fun thing. People come to see where we make it and how it's all done, meet us personally, and then taste the product there. And we're glad that everybody allows us to operate as a cocktail bar as well, because that helps generate revenue. But the caveat is, if you allow people to start distilleries in the middle of nowhere, and then they put their tasting rooms, which is kind of like a bar selling bottles and cocktails, they're going to put them in the major, it's a loophole that many could get started. And then you've got a distillery row in Cheyenne, Jackson, Casper, Laramie, Cody, Sheridan, 6 major cities. And that takes away not only from us distilleries that put our heart and our soul and headaches, you know, getting started in that major city, they would start to cut our throat. Does that make sense? And I don't know, I just don't think that's fair. So allowing a second one to possibly, I understand that Representative Duncan is possibly looking at making amendments to where it's just tastings and stuff. Well, the thing is we didn't know about this bill. This was thrust upon all of us distilleries. We don't know who the original people were that wanted Ms. Duncan to present it, but we weren't involved in the discussion. We had an emergency guild meeting, Distillers Guild meeting, to talk about it. And nobody knew who put it forward or why. It amazes me that this was not discussed with us ahead of time, all of us distilleries. And talking with Mr. Mosier, he's willing to sit down and have a meeting with all of us distilleries. And then, as my email explained, it doesn't affect just us. It affects, if that happened and people played that game, it affects the bars and packaged liquor stores, which if they started in a major city, the amount of time and money they spent to get started, that's taken a major market share, anywhere from $250,000 to $350,000 every year, just in cocktail and bottle sales. And you can imagine, you multiply that times how many distilleries might get started eventually playing that game, it's substantial. It could hurt a lot of different bars, packaged liquor stores, and distilleries. That's why I feel like we need to try and possibly push for an amendment to make that first tasting room at your distillery or your nearest town. And a few other distilleries feel the same way. They couldn't be here today, but I think they're on the phone calls. And if they want, they can vocalize their own opinion. I'm just here vocalizing how Chronicles feels. But I'm glad that Mr. Mosier is willing to, I'm hoping that you guys don't vote to pass this bill, because a lot of the distilleries I've talked to, a few of them, we all want the opportunity to discuss it first. And it just didn't feel like we got a chance to discuss it. You know what I mean? And that's how I feel about that one. The DTC, I don't know much about it, so I really can't say. From an outside perspective, sitting back there and hearing things, I can understand where Representative Duncan's coming from, the amount of lost revenue from people coming in. This is just me throwing a spitball idea out there. Like Mr. Mosier said, maybe you could create 2 to 3 people, heck, maybe even 1, I don't know. Give them a $50,000 pot, and they target all these places around the United States, buy it, it's sent to the Wyoming Liquor Division, or maybe a PO box or something somewhere. And as soon as you get it, you nab them, send out a letter. Either you fine them, or like what he said, to their whoever issued them the license, and that will help stem the problem or get rid of the problem. Because that one person or 2 people with that little pot could be purchasing a lot of alcohol from all over the United States, finding out who's wrong, and then bam. Then after a while, people would get scared to do that. But that's mainly my feelings on this bill, and thank you very much for listening to me. Have a good day.
Thank you. Would you stick around in case we have
Yes, sir. Oh,
questions?
sorry about that.
Any questions? Was it Mr. Letcher?
Lesher, Lesher. Yes, sir.
S-H-E-R, Letcher. Okay. Any questions?
Mr. Vice Chairman, I just want to make a comment. Thank you, Mr. Lesher, for being here. And so my memory, if I recollect, and this is my second term here, I know this was kind of a joint interim topic, and we kind of discussed it. And so there was talk. So I just want to say that it was unfair that this was just sprung on you, and I have a bunch of notes from my interim.
Maybe that's what was.
Yeah.
Was that before my time? Maybe. Because I don't remember this ever being a thing, but we're new to this legislative thing and this whole distilling world. So sorry for feeling that way, but yeah. But that's why I'm hoping that we don't vote on this to pass it today. I'm hoping that because Mr. Mosier is going to create a sit-down meeting, either via Zoom or in person or phone call, with all the distilleries, bars, packaged liquor stores, to see how the majority feels and how we can proceed to make everybody happy.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Lesher. Appreciate your testimony today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Chairman and committee.
Do we have any others online that wish to testify? Chairman Zwanitzer?
You have 5, Mr. Chairman. I think Ms. Grott is already in the room, and I'll bring in Mr. Mead after her, if that works.
Okay, Ms. Grott, if you would please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Laura Grott. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Beer Distributors Association. Our association stands in opposition to the direct-to-consumer piece of this legislation. We do realize malt beverages are not part of this. However, we do stand behind our retailers who are our customers, and we stand behind the 3-tier system. The current system has the necessary regulatory structures that support enforcement and accountability. The states can check and make sure all the taxes are paid, IDs are checked, and illicit alcohol is not getting into the hands of consumers. Direct-to-consumer shipping of spirits across state lines compromise this. As Mr. Mosier alluded to earlier too, 45% of DTC is getting into the hands of underage drinkers, and that's a huge concern. Just last week, my neighbor called and said, would you go get a package off my front porch? It was supposed to be signed by an adult, and the carrier just left it. So you can label these packages all you want and say you must be 21 years or older, but packages get dropped off, and these high spirit alcohol drinks are getting into the hands of underage drinkers. So we just ask that you consider the effectiveness and safety of the three-tier system that we fought very hard for a few years ago. It's there for a reason, and most of it is the safety and the quality of the products that are being shipped. And that's our testimony today.
Thank you, Ms. Grott. Any questions for her? Seeing none, who would you say was next? Mr. Chairman?
Brad Mead.
Brad Mead. Sir, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman Bear and Chairman Zwanitzer and members of the committee. My name is Brad Mead. I am one of the founders of Wyoming Whiskey and its CEO. We're the first legal distillery in the state of Wyoming. I believe there are about 7 of them now. I should mention it's kind of a full circle. When we started about 15 years ago, and with the help of the Wyoming State Liquor Association and this legislature, and a great guy named Brent Kuntz, who was a lobbyist, we got the current law passed that provides for 1 satellite location. And today, Marianne Shaner, Brent's daughter, is helping us through this process, and she, I know, can answer any questions that may come up if I'm not around or after this hearing. I'm here today to speak in support of that portion of House Bill 159 that changes the number of satellite locations from 1 to 2. Specifically, this is paragraph 12, 203G, small Romanet I. By way of background, Wyoming Whiskey makes a value-added Wyoming identified product. It's distributed now in all 50 states. We use Wyoming grain and Wyoming water. It's all comes from the Bighorn Basin, and we think it's some of the best grain and best water in the world. The University of Wyoming tells us that the formation we get the water out of, that water is 6,000 years old. It's been filtered through limestone. And we make some amazing whiskey, as do other distillers in the state. We're proud of our whiskey, and we're proud of the state of Wyoming as well. We're glad that it's sold across the country, and we're glad that the name Wyoming is sold all across the country. Since working with the legislature back in 2012 to draft and pass the current law that allows 1 satellite distillery, that has, or 1 satellite location, I should say, that has been located for us in Kirby. Population 56 when we started. I think it's about population 92 now, according to the sign on the edge of town. They're a little bit optimistic. We're the only business right now in Kirby, Wyoming. The whiskey shop we have there, despite having only around 5,000 visitors, in the past 12 months generated something like $18,000 in sales tax through the sale of whiskey and merchandise, close to $40,000 in property tax to Hot Springs County. And I don't know of another example where the legislature would say, because you started your, for example, car dealership in Lander, you can't have one in Cheyenne, or you can't have one in Casper or whatever. You got to make your choice and stick there. And that seems to be some of the argument we're hearing. I should say that the Distillers Guild has taken no position on direct-to-consumer sales or a second satellite because there's not unanimity. And I'm not sure there's ever going to be unanimity, because it sounds to me like some distillers are adamantly against anybody else coming into their quote territory. As important as the sale of whiskey as a second satellite to us is the fact that it provides a brand building opportunity. We feel like we like to have people come to Wyoming, buy something that's made in Wyoming that has Wyoming's name on it, and take it back to wherever they live and buy it again there. And I honestly think in the long run, this doesn't just help Wyoming whiskey, it helps all of the distilleries in the state of Wyoming who want to expand and grow. And really, that's what we're asking you to do, is let us get bigger. Wyoming whiskey's been a great product for the liquor division and for the Department of Revenue. In the year 2020, we sold close to $1 million worth of whiskey to the state of Wyoming. No, I'm not talking about the other 49 states. And that gets marked up, as you know, by the liquor division to the tune of about 17, a little more than 17%. We're growing. We expect to build one new 2,000 barrel warehouse every year for the next 10 years. We'll buy more grain from the farmers in the Big Horn Basin, and we'll employ more people. And I think that the attitude of the legislature and the state of Wyoming has traditionally been business friendly. That doesn't mean we're going to skate past whatever local regulations may exist in Jackson or Sheridan or wherever else. I mean, we'll still have to comply with that stuff. We're still going to have to get a license in that community. But right now, I have to say, there's been some talk that, well, if we go from 1 satellite to 2, the sky's going to fall in and out of state people are going to take advantage of the circumstance. There has not been a single out of state entity that has taken advantage of this 1 satellite we have now. I have no reason to believe that suddenly changing it to 2 is going to create a land rush from out of state people. We don't have a crystal ball about what the future holds. But I do believe that the quality of the spirits that Wyoming distillers make will speak for itself. And I do believe that the best thing for the industry as a whole is for as many people as possible to taste liquid to lips of Wyoming's products. This is, I have to say, the only Wyoming value-added product I know of that gets distributed as widely as it is. We think this is fair. We think wineries now actually have 3. So it's a fairly simple fix. It changes the number 1 to the number 2. The sort of, well, let's kick the can down the road, and at some point in the future, Mike Mosier, who I have to say has been a great partner, and he and I have talked a lot over the past months about this. We don't agree on the language. We feel the simplest, most straightforward approach, transparent approach, is to say we're going from 1 satellite location to 2, instead of creating some sort of bifurcated thing where we hope at some point in the future these disparate people from the industry are going to agree on a common thing. We're not, frankly. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions to the extent of my ability. And again, I appreciate your time. I know you are scrambling in the context of the snowstorm down there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mead. Any questions of Mr. Mead? Representative Swanser or Blackburn, any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mead. Anyone else in the room?
You have Mr. Rudd, and then I'll bring in Ms. Pollock after that.
Okay, we have them in the waiting room, and we'll listen to Mr. Pickard.
Yes, good afternoon. Members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, my name is Dave Pickard. I'm representing the Wyoming Spirits Brokers Association, which you've heard me testify over the last 4 or 5 months on what during the interim and then what was on House Bill 13. The WSBA is affiliated with Wine Spirits Wholesalers of America, representing over 350 member companies, which is about 80% of all wine and spirits sold at wholesale in the United States. We do oppose the bill as drafted. We stand very firm in opposition to direct-to-consumer. We believe that the 3-tier system that has been set up works very well, and it provides for efficiencies. It protects underage access to alcohol, and provides, in most instances, protects the revenue stream. And what we've heard today is that there's illegal product coming in to the state, and what that would indicate to me and our members is that there needs to be more enforcement. And that is going to be a real challenge. You can see what Michigan has done in requiring common carrier language that would require reporting from common carriers. And I don't know if the Wyoming Trucking Association is in the Zoom room or not, but I do know from previous testimony that UPS and FedEx are in the business of picking up and delivering packages, not enforcing age restrictions. And you've also heard today that the instances where that local law is not enforced and products can be left simply on your doorsteps. Even in Michigan, where there is this requirement and they've gone through an audit, and I am going to speak about wine because it's not in the spirits world, but 1 in 3 bottles that were shipped into Michigan were shipped illegally. And so even though you have a requirement for registration and licensure in this bill, doesn't mean that the bad actors are going to step up to the plate and become registered and the liquor division is going to know about them. The other thing that the 3-tier system protects against is monopolies. I know we had a discussion in the interim about monopolies, and you can have that personal view on monopolies in general. But let's look at the marketplace right now. There is a monopoly operator out there. It's called Amazon. And if you go in, if you open the door to DTC of spirits, Amazon is going to step through that door and bring all of their might and power right behind them in order to harm the retailers in the state of Wyoming. We know that the brick and mortar operations, whether you look at mom and pop hardware stores, how they have evolved and actually gone away over the many years with the introduction of the Home Depots and the large big box stores. And you've also seen their markets change with the activity of a large shipper like Amazon. So for all of these reasons and others that we talked about in the interim, we just stand opposed to the legislation as it is drafted now. And Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Pickard? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
I should mention that we had 3 bills and it looks like we're only going to make it through 2. And so if the future testifiers would please hurry along, we'll at least get through 2 maybe. If we hurry. Who's next? Dan?
I think Mr. Rudd was next, then Ms. Pollock.
Okay. Mr. Rudd, would you please proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. I'll make it quick. I'm with the Wine Institute. I'm Central States Counsel for the Wine Institute, which is a trade association of about 1,000 California wineries and associated businesses. We are neutral on the bill because we are the Wine Institute and this deals with distilled spirits. I just wanted to mention briefly, and the reason I'm testifying is currently in the bill, it has the markup for direct-to-consumer spirits, if this were to pass, to be 17.6, which is different from the wine direct-to-consumer markup, which is 12%. And we believe that the 12% is a good amount. Obviously, we'd always like to be lower, but the reason that it's 12% versus 17.6% is because, well, one of the reasons is consumers don't have the ability to negotiate on the price. The markup of 12% is on the retail price of the wine. I was looking earlier today online. If you directly ship from the winery a bottle of the Prisoner Company Thorn, which I think is a Merlot, it's $45 from the winery itself, whereas in Jackson Hole, there was advertised a price of $40 or $40.99, $40.99. And so if you were to add the 12% or higher than that, if it were distilled spirits in this bill, the price goes up considerably, whereas in the brick and mortars, it's already priced at a lower rate because it's taxed. This markup is on the wholesale price of the wine that is shipped to or delivered from the liquor division versus the retail price, which is shipped directly to the consumer. And I'm happy to discuss this further with y'all today, although not enough time. So hopefully in the future, we can sit down and talk further about this, but I did want to point that out. And the reason for that markup being 12%, not 17.6%. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd, for your testimony. Any questions? All right, Ms. Pollock.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. I'll be very brief. I know we're running up against the clock here. So I just start by saying I'm here speaking in favor of both elements in this bill today. I'm a distillery owner from Casper, Wyoming, and have been in the industry for about 7 years now. I'm speaking in favor of both elements because it's my opinion that Wyoming should seek to facilitate as many business models within our industries as we possibly can. For me, there's no reason that Wyoming should not be the best place in the country to operate a distillery. And in that vein, you've seen a little bit of disagreement among distillers as to a one-size-fits-all legislative initiative. And that's because I think there isn't one, because of the variety of business models that I think distilleries should be able to pursue. So I will always support expanding the types of business models that are viable in the state. I'll spend most of my time talking about DTC, and I really just have three main takeaways for you. The first one is that this is where the industry is heading eventually, and it's simply because the market is demanding it. People are expecting to be able to order more and more products online. We've seen significant increases in that retail space, and I think Wyoming should be part of that conversation. To me, that we're missing out on opportunity if we aren't at least talking about how this might benefit Wyoming companies and the revenue department of Wyoming. For me, we should make it so that our distilleries can compete in that growing space. And as we've seen today, right now, there are already online retailers who are filling in that gap because there are not legal players who are allowed to fill that market need as we currently see it. And in those cases, all that's happening, we're not really preventing anything. We're just missing out on the revenue possibilities. My second point is that many other states are doing this. Contrary to what you are being led to believe, there are only a few states that allow it now. But this session, we've already seen it starting to move through different chambers and different state legislators. I anticipate next session, we'll see even more and more, further and further, until we see this in many, many, many states. And I think that the important thing to note is that the many states that are already doing this, their retail spaces have not collapsed. We can even look at Virginia, where they've recently done this, and we can check the sales of their state stores, which is the entirety of their retail sector. And the sales of products that are now being direct shipped by distilleries in that state have actually increased in their retail stores as well. So that's the idea behind this, is that these sales support retail sales further, and ultimately drive interest in brands and new market spaces for retailers as interest in the products grow. The last point I have for you is that in our very own state, we have a model. DTC wine has been around for quite a long time, and if we track the trajectory of that, DTC wine sales have increased, along with retail wine sales, along with special orders of wine at retail stores. So it seems like it is possible for these two different market entry points to operate in harmony. And that's what we're seeing in our own state and in the states that are allowing this, by the fact that there is still a market for wine in the retail space. And those retailers have not, in fact, collapsed as a result of DTC. I'll just be really brief on the satellite location. For me, this is something that we have actually been talking about for years. And again, it just goes back to my desire to see distilleries have as many business opportunities as possible in this state. I think when we're speaking about how the bill 10 years ago or so was originally intended for the satellite, I think we've seen that the definition evolve nationwide over the last decade. And so if we hadn't been allowed to do cocktails and it had just been tastings originally, you can believe that I would be here today telling you that we needed to be able to sell cocktails at our distillery satellites as well, because it's a critical element of our business. And in fact, that conversation is happening in every state that doesn't currently allow cocktail sales as well. So for me, 2 is a very reasonable request. Some states have as many as 5. So I don't think we're out of line. Trying to get 2 spots, particularly given the rural nature of our state. None of us have the advantage of being in a community that has 500,000 people to come and start to build a brand in. So the more we can grow our reach, the better for the distilling industry. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions? Thank you, Ms. Pollock. Anyone else? 3 minutes. So if anyone has anything to testify or any new information to share with the committee, we'd like to at least close public testimony before we adjourn here.
I think you're good, Mr. Chairman, online.
Okay, anybody in the room wishing to testify? We will close public testimony then. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Brosco, second by Representative Duncan. Any discussion? We don't have time to work the bill, but if you have a notion to.
Motion to table.
Any comments? Question being called. Barb, if you please call the roll.
Representative Blackburn,
You're muted.
Give us the thumbs up or thumbs down. Thumbs up.
up.
Aye.
Thank you. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Vice Chairman Air.
No.
Representative Hunt. Representative McGuire, aye. Representative Roscoe.
Aye.
Chairman Swanitzer.
Aye.
7-2.
Okay, committee, we're due back on the floor in about 1 minute, so we'll close the meeting. Thank you all.